I had a friend come to me and say, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, well, 3 or 4 of my friends got together and they're like, "Is Jason okay? He's selling all of his things. He's buying one-way tickets to different countries. He's changing his client base and all this stuff." And I had to look at her and say, "I'm better than I've ever been, but it looks crazy from the outside."
That is today's guest and one of my buddies, Jason Robinson, a.k.a. J-Rob from the nomadexperiment.com. This guy defines one of the core tenets of the show, traveling the world on your terms, no matter what your situation or experience. And he has had a lot of situations over the years that on paper may look like they could prevent travel. But J-Rob went from $50,000 in debt at the age of 28 to a sustainable nomadic lifestyle. And his updated Beginner Traveler's Guide condenses a decade of travel experience and experimentation into actionable steps for anyone wanting to travel more, regardless of age, medical conditions, which we'll talk about in a moment, or starting point. Now, whether you're in your 20s, you're listening to this thinking, "Oh, I have all the time in the world to travel," or maybe you're in your 40s or 50s or older, and you're like, "Oh, maybe I missed the window on X, Y, or Z travel experience." This episode will perhaps dismantle some of those age-related myths, but also give you some practical tools and inspiration to design or redesign your upcoming travels. And in this episode, Jason shares 5 essential tips for getting started with travel, how doubling his accommodation costs actually saves him money, and how it can do the same for you, how he navigates type 1 diabetes while traveling across multiple countries, some powerful mindset shifts in here to help you sustain travel for the long haul, and loads more. And it's happening right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. So excited to bring you this conversation with Jason Robinson in a moment. Of course, the expanded and updated edition of his Beginner Traveler's Guide you can find over at the nomadexperiment.com. Tips and strategies and tough love to help you finally kickstart your travel life or go full nomad. And if you're not a beginner traveler, not to worry. This conversation, I do believe, is very useful and inspiring. We hit on a lot of powerful mindsets to consider as you go about planning travel for the coming year. Of course, he talks about his experience overcoming medical challenges to keep traveling, and just a lot of takeaways in this one. Love this guy. And I do want to give you a little bit of a teaser for what's coming on the back end. I'm going to give a shout out to a listener in Canada who's planning a 7-month solo travel sabbatical. Good on him. And also, I'll leave you with a quote that I think sums this one up very nicely indeed. And it has to do with that beginner's mind, which I think is important to embrace. No matter how many times we've done a thing, it's always possible to open your mind and gain lessons with that beginner's mindset, if you will. So stick around for that. Don't forget, by the way, zerototravel.com/newsletter. Our free newsletter goes out once a week, and you can get it over there with all the travel goodies and stay in touch off the pod. Here's my conversation with Jason Robinson. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Jason Robinson, welcome back to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. How you doing today?
Good. Glad to be here. It's early for me.
Always a pleasure. Well, you're an early bird, right? I mean, you can.
I am an early bird. I am an early bird. I tend not to be this interactive with people this early, so I'm jacked up. I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew right now.
You make an exception for me. That is
of
sweet.
Course.
I mean, we've known each other. I should have figured out how many years we've known each other now. Many, many years. And all of this started as an experiment, but it kind of went of course, your website, the Nomad Experiment. You can find a lot of links there. You got the new website, type1diabetestravel.com, which we're going to talk about traveling with a medical condition, because I think there's a lot of universal lessons that we can pull out of your experience there, even though not everybody listening is dealing with that specific condition or a medical condition. But I know I've watched some of your videos, and there's a lot of thoughtful stuff you're putting out around that. But, I was just wondering, man, how is it for you now, this whole lifestyle starting as an experiment, which has turned in basically into a way of life, right? Like, it's not an experiment anymore. You've actually been doing this for many years.
Yes. The bigger picture, it has completely changed the way that I live my life, and, could have never expected the complexion of my life to look like this at this point, considering, yes, where I started. And you and I have known each other for pushing 10 years now. In person time, probably 7 or so years. I think it was Denver, at the LI conference, or LI shenanigans, that we met in Denver one year. But originally this was just a goal of traveling. Literally didn't see my third country until I was 40 years old. So, to anybody who's never traveled or hasn't really traveled internationally, I think that probably is a little bit heavy, to hear. It's like, whoa, not seeing your third country until 40 years old, that can be intimidating. And that's where I was sitting at around, 35 years old. I said, okay, if this is a potential shift in my life that I want to take, how do I get there? And essentially I started chipping off very calculatedly these ways of pushing my comfort zone, and then pushing it a little bit more and a little bit more. And eventually, after 2 or 3 years of doing that, and this is the super quick story, but after 2 or 3 years of really, really pushing myself, and then finally taking some international trips, I decided to downsize my life pretty considerably and sell my home and sell a lot of things, and now live pretty nomadically. And I was looking at one of the things in the book is it mentioned is I have a monumentous moments list, and anybody that wants to take that and change the name, do what you will with it. But I have this monumentous moments list that I started back at the beginning of this process. And it was a way of celebrating the little hurdles, but also the things that were kind of a fork in the road, where I chose one direction and say, okay, this was a change. This was a big moment that I kind of want to remember. And maybe it was emotional, maybe it was financial, maybe it was physical, or any of these things. But there's all these little moments of change that I remember. And one of the things that I track on there that I track now is how many days I spend outside the US. And actually, over the past 2 years, I've spent more than half of the year outside the US, which blows my mind. So yeah, to your point, it has become a complete shift in my life. And one of my best friends from high school yesterday actually asked me, he's like, how long are you going to do this? And I said, as long as it feels,
nomads get, right?
Yeah, but as long as it feels right, and
right.
and that's the other thing I encourage people to do is, do what feels right, push that comfort zone a little bit. But whenever you see that you need to make a change, then go ahead and make that change, and don't apologize for it. So,
yeah, ding, ding, ding. The correct answer is as long as it feels right. I find your story so inspiring. And I mean, you mentioned in the beginning the idea of, only having seen, I'm using air quotes, 3 countries by the time you were 40, which is maybe 3 countries more than a lot of people listening, which again, just goes to show, like, this is, we tie so much to age in this culture now that it feels like, especially if you get in these internet bubbles, right? Where you're like, let's say you get interested in the digital nomad lifestyle or X, Y, and Z thing. Nice. Then you're consuming all this content, you're getting all this content fed to you, and it makes it feel like, well, just like everybody's done this, but you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how, like, even though intellectually that it's an algorithm pushing this stuff in front of you because it knows you're interested in now, wants your attention and your focus and everything like that, it still can have that psychological effect. And that's why I love these long form interviews, because like a reminder, like, well, wait a minute, do we need to tie age to goals or be in a specific place at a specific age? I think that your story exemplifies that idea. That's like, Yeah. So what? Like, hey, that's probably 3 countries more than somebody else. And also, you got started with the traveling in your 40s and, heavy duty. And that was like the right time for you on your journey for whatever reason, man. Like you said on your website, you're a working class kid from a small Midwest city. You never thought traveling was an option. You thought it was too expensive for other people. It was for other people with better means, excuse me. And, but here we are. I mean, you figured it out, man. So anyway, I know you know all this, but I just think I just want to highlight how cool it is. And I think that my point is, if you're listening and you want to do X, Y, or Z thing, don't tie your age to it, man.
It's such
and
it's kind of cliche, because as somebody now in their mid 40s, to actually have the thought of saying, I honestly feel like this is one of the most prosperous points in my life, and that doesn't tie with how much money I'm making or any of these things. It has to do with life is really long. And once you figure that out and we stop thinking in this scarcity mindset of we have to have it now or else it's too late. Once I embraced that mentality of, this is really just the start, because at this point I have half of my adult life left, hopefully. So, to anybody in their 30s or their 20s who still has trepidation about trying something new, there's just so much time in front of you. And we don't think that way. I think, as a society, I don't think we think that way, and social media doesn't help any. But, embracing that idea of, the amount of stuff that I've been able to do in the past 5 years that I never thought I was going to be able to do under less stress than I used to have really opens my eyes to what the future can hold if I choose to, continue to engage with it the way that I am. So yeah, I always said age is but a number, but now I really continue to believe that more and more.
Yeah, I love that. Giving yourself the grace in a way to pursue the goals, but also I guess it's like this idea of, you have this container of like, well, hey, this is just like a methodical, let's not like make this a stressful thing. Although I understand, there's something to age. And I mean, that's why you read these stories where people on their deathbeds and they're like, I wish I traveled more, or I wish I did this when I was younger. There are certain physical aspects to travel, I think, that you want to try to prioritize when you're younger, but that doesn't mean you can never do them or a version of them, right? Like if you're 70 and you can't hike to Machu Picchu, you can still take the train to Machu Picchu, for example. You know what I mean? I was scheduled to talk to somebody earlier who, like, they took off and traveled around the world at 17 years old and they had no money. And it was like this whole crazy adventure, right? And I was thinking about myself at 17 years old and I was like, no way would I have had the guts to do that then, nor was I probably mature enough or could handle it. Maybe I could have, and I would have surprised myself. I'm using that as an extreme example in comparing it to like what you did, which was kind of like, like you said, starting this as an experiment. Let me go over here. Let me like spend some time in this country. Let me see what this lifestyle is like. That's probably more the sort of like how the average person is going to do it. And I guess I just wondering, looking back now that you've sort of dove in fully, like you said, you've been spending like half the time out of the United States, half the time in, and you're just fully engaged in this lifestyle that you were building early on. What is your advice to somebody who's looking to get started? And maybe this is the jumping off point for getting into some of the tips you have to share today from the updated version of the book. But that idea of kind of like getting your feet wet, doing as an experiment, kind of like building up to something versus perhaps jumping right in. Like what are your sort of lessons learned?
Yeah. So, the title of the original edition of the book was The Beginner Traveler's Guide to Going Nomad. And one of the updates with the second edition is the shortening of that title to The Beginner Traveler's Guide, because I want people to see this as an opportunity to get started. And as you know, travel, longer and longer travel or long form travel is really a rinse and repeat of short-term travel. So, take a two-day trip or a 2-week trip. And, if you want to extend that into 2 months, all the elements are the same. It just changes a bit. So that's part of the reason that I changed a lot in this book, is to make it more accessible for people that are in that, whatever that starting point looks like. So, you kind of asked me to think about my top 5 tips for somebody thinking about this, and I jotted down a few things that are in the book or that I think are really important. And the first one is just to make sure you get your passport now. Just right now. Just stop
There
what
you
you're
go.
doing. Pause the
practical
podcast.
one. I like it.
Yeah. Well, I have spoken to 2 people in the past 2 weeks. One of them through a client, who, they have a national base, and this person works for a fairly large corporation, and they're in their 30s and they don't have a passport. And they were actually just getting ready to run into an issue with the real ID, and they didn't have the real ID, and now they don't have a passport. And I'm like, oh, just get your passport. And I spoke to somebody a couple of days ago as well, and they don't have their passport yet. And that still blows my mind a little bit. But the reality is a lot of US citizens don't have their passports. And that's one of the things that's going to slow you down when you do have an opportunity to take some more chances or to go new places. If you have an opening and somebody says, hey, let's go to Spain, and I got a cheap place to go and it's going to be super inexpensive, can you go? And you say, I can't because I don't have a passport. That's just a travesty. So the first thing is just to get that in motion as quickly as possible. The thing lasts you 10 years. So, there's just no reason not to have one. Even my first passport had 1 stamp in it by the time I had to renew it. Right. I had high hopes.
Fair enough. I mean, it's a great starting point. I didn't even think about including that on the list, but yeah, I mean, chances are maybe a lot of people listening already have their passport, but if you don't, there's your call to action. If the passport thing doesn't apply to you, maybe it's get your digital nomad visa or get your, whatever thing going that you want to lock in. That could be like your version of that. Get the paperwork thing you need to travel, to do the thing you want to do.
Yep. And then, the next thing I would say is just start where you're at. If you're really at the beginning of travel, or if you've, I want to continue to speak to that crowd, because when I started listening to your podcast over 10 years ago and, Travis Sherry's podcast over 10 years ago, I was in that position, but I was listening to stories about people that were doing the crazy things. So I had to back it up a good bit. Start where you are. So you start traveling domestically, start traveling locally, start house sitting locally, start to do all these things that you see these influencers or these social media folks doing that are on a grand scale, and say, what's the smallest thing that is between me and them? And let me start there. So, that's the next move is to start where you're at, and don't think that any movement forward is too small of a movement forward. The only thing you can probably do wrong is to stagnate and to just keep thinking about it. So start making those little moves right away would be the next thing that I would say is really important. Not to dissuade yourself by saying, this isn't a relevant thing for me to do. It's not big enough for me to do. Stop listening to all of the social media stuff, or stop looking at everybody that is living this real deep travel lifestyle, and just say, okay, where am I and what do I need to do?
Yeah. Love that. That's a power question if I ever heard one.
Yeah, for me it was hostels, and traveling domestically. I had barely taken any flights in the US, and for me to think about going international, and not only going to a new country where I didn't speak the language, but also taking an international flight, or dealing with all of those logistics all at once while trying to maintain work and life and all of those things, that was too overwhelming for me at the time. So I started traveling domestically, and I would take a 5-day trip to Philadelphia or to Oregon or to Seattle, knowing that there was a hostel there that I could try out, and it was inexpensive, and that the infrastructure was there for me to still make the things work that I needed to work in my life, but I could flex those muscles. I've graduated away from hostels for the most part at this point. I stay at co-livings, but that's the whole point of this statement, is it's a natural progression. Start where you're at and grow on, build on those things. What's the most important to you? Is it traveling? Is it financial? Is it, making sure that you can actually, maybe you have the ability to work remote already, but you've never done that. So, take a test remote trip for a week and don't tell anybody that you're gone. You might work remote, but you work from home the whole time. Well, push your comfort zone by going to work somewhere else for a week and see how that feels, and go, oh, I did it. There were some stumbling blocks, but I can see where I can grow on this. So yeah, just start where you're at.
Before we move on to the next one, tell me about the shift to co-living. What do you like about the co-living? What are the pros and cons of the co-living environment as a traveler?
It's so interesting because we live in our bubbles now, and I think that everybody knows what co-living is, and this is one of the biggest questions I get asked these days. Originally I started out mostly staying in hostels because that's all I knew, and co-living was weren't around. And the reality of staying in hostels is most people are there only to travel. They're not necessarily getting work done. If they are, it's for an hour or two here and there, or they have to go to a co-working space to get work done, because a hostel is a social environment. It's a lot of go. It's let's see the sights. Since day one, for me, I have to get the work done. If I don't get my work done, this lifestyle doesn't work, and nothing works because I got to make the money to pay the bills. So co-livings are, imagine a co-working space and a hostel in kind of a communal Airbnb. Those Airbnbs where you might rent a room and there's two other guests that rent their own individual room, but then you have the house that is available for everybody in the kitchen that's available for everybody. Imagine the three of those had a baby, and now you have a co-living space. So essentially, the way that I live now is I find a co-living in whatever city or small town that I'm staying in whatever country I'm going to, and I rent my own room. Oftentimes I have an en-suite bathroom. Sometimes it'll be a shared bathroom with a couple of other people in the main house, but I have my own room. I can get my sleep. I can work in my room if I want to. And then there is an actual co-working space that has desks, that has quiet time, or, the whole point of it is that it's quiet, that people go there to get their work done 24/7, because a lot of folks are on world time clocks, and some people are working at midnight. And, if we're over in, Eastern Europe, there's people working with West Coast US, and they're working some really crazy hours. So, having a co-working space in there, and then you have all of this social time, and most co-livings have community events that they plan. So they actually have staff and facilities and volunteers that are planning events, so that when your workday is done, you don't have to necessarily do all the planning. You can just say, I just worked a 10-hour day, but I really want to go hang out, and oh, look, everybody's going to do karaoke tonight, so let me just join the group and go do karaoke. So those are the three big components of co-living that, my budget for travel accommodations has doubled since I started this. Just to be super transparent, back when I started this, my budget for accommodations staying in hostels was about $400 a month around the world. Now I budget about $800 a month, because that's what I need to stay in a co-living. But between the value and the ability to get more work done easily, it pays for itself very quickly. So co-livings are almost one of the first things that I make sure that I have if I'm looking at a place. And if I can't find a co-living, I have to be really realistic with myself about whether that's a good choice for me, because again, if the work stops, then I can't live this life. I can't get my insulin and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's like especially if you're tying it directly to income, if you think that you need to get these work hours in for whatever reason, and it's going to be a hindrance if you stay in a hostel, you have to find a co-working space, and on. You could literally lose income depending on your situation. So then, not so much the double the price as it is an investment in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a value for sure.
And I guess in an investment in the travel experience you want to have too. You're around other people working for themselves. They kind of get the idea that, part of the day is going to be spent doing that on most days. And I guess that creates a vibe too.
Well, and I think, to not dissuade anybody from a co-living, if you're not working on the road, the average age of people that are staying in a co-living and the reason they are in a place and the speed with which they are engaging with the place is slower. And it's a little bit of an older age group. And when I say that, I would say the sweet spot is between 30 and 50 is where most people that are staying in co-livings, that's the age range. Whereas a hostel is more like 20s with a good amount of 30s, and then starts to get really thin, 40, 50, 60 when you're looking at hostels. So the energy is a little bit different, and to me, it's a little bit more realistic. I've never wanted to fast travel. I'm not good at fast travel. I've tried it. It burns me out super quickly. So the more that energy is around, the more drained I get. So the more there is a realistic energy of, you can only do so many things in a day. You can only do so many things in a week. That's a really good vibe for me. And co-livings have that because of the fact that a lot of people there are prioritizing things a little bit differently. It's not necessarily a one and done trip. It's usually a longer trip, where some of those are digital nomads, but that's actually a great place for anybody in their, late 20s or 30s that realizes that you can't keep up the pace that we had in our 20s or our late teens. It's actually a really good place for anybody with that, little bit slower mentality while, still trying to see all the things.
Cool. Thanks for that breakdown, man. All right. So yeah, we're just 2 in. We've got 3 more to go for this particular list. And then I have some other, of course, we got more questions than this, but this is great. I'm excited to hear the third one.
These are in no necessarily particular order, but
well, except for get your passport.
Well, that one's important. I would say the next one I would say is if travel is really, and your audience really is, the person listening to this really does want to level up their travel game, get your financial shit straight. That could take a while, but that is, if you're like, he's going to talk about budgeting. Yeah, it's a real thing. And, this isn't me just, having the mic and spouting off. I was $50,000 in debt when I was 28 years old. And I was crippled by fear and stress and inability to make any changes in my life because I could barely, get done what needed done with the money that was coming in or with the debt that I was in. And between 28 years old and 32 years old, I paid off $50,000 worth of debt.
Wow. And congrats, man. That's huge.
Yeah. And I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. I didn't know how stressful or how limited that made me until I got over that hurdle. And then I realized that I had more options and I had more possibilities, and it was no longer conjecture. And I think with knowledge comes power, and with, the ignorance of your own financial situation and ignoring things and saying, oh yeah, I make about this much, or I spend about this much. The more of those things that stack up on each other, that creates anxiety. It creates fear. It creates all of these nasty things that start to hold you back from any big or small potential changes in your life. And, that was step one for me. That was an eye-opening experience of, wow, I feel this lightness. I can actually start to try some things. It was later on when I finally started to have maybe a little bit of money in the bank that I said, oh, I can actually, and a little bit of money in the bank is the key phrase there. But even just a little bit of money in the bank, as opposed to being in the negative, starts to even more open up those possibilities and say, wait, I could take 2 weeks off and not actually work the whole time. Or I could go to a country where I have limited ability to work that wouldn't have been an opportunity 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Back to that whole, we have a lot of life in front of us as opposed to behind us, and that time scarcity thing. 4 years seemed like a long time for me to pay, for me to have a $20 entertainment budget per month to get this done. I had some pretty crazy budgets set in place. That seemed like a long time at the time. Looking back, it was just this tiny little blip, and it was tough, but I got over it, and then things started to open up. So if your financial situation is unclear and frustrating and you're running from it, just buckle down and get that done, because it's going to make it so much easier to take some of these bigger chances and changes in your life if you really do want to move towards this lifestyle of travel, or even if it's just getting outside the US 2 or 3 months a year, which is a lot for so many people. It's going to make it so much less stressful and so much more enjoyable, especially when you're on the ground in a country. You don't want to just be thinking the whole time, I can't afford this, I can't afford this, I can't afford this. So know your picture, get that out of the way, and then keep moving forward from there. And I'll stop, because this is not a budgeting podcast. So I'll stop.
No, that's okay. No, I think it's important, and I like the approach in that if you are somebody who looks, avoids the topic, like you said, this is like a way to reframe it, right? Like you're saying budgeting is sort of like a path to feeling more free. And if you're thinking about it that way and buckling down or, going through the numbers or whatever, which let's face it, I don't know many people personally that enjoy that type of thing. I'm not good at it myself. I'm like probably more in the category, enough's coming in, something's going out. It all works out in the end type of thing. But that doesn't always work in every part of life, right? And you got to just be honest with it, I guess. And like you said, I think that if you're thinking about it with your approach as a pathway towards like this sort of freedom from fear and stress and all that stuff, then you'll be much more motivated to just dive in and do those things, I guess. If you just keep that at the top of your mind, which is not always easy when you're dealing with money stuff, I know.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people, that are listening to this podcast are probably thinking in that side hustle possible mentality, or, changing the way that they're working or the things that they're doing, or if they're thinking down that algorithm, social media bubble of, we live in a different world than we did 10, 20 years ago. There's high potential for burnout in change. If you make too many changes at once, if you take on too much stuff, whether it's travel, life, finances, burnout is real. And the less stress and anxiety you bring into each one of those parts, the less likely you are to burn out in a big way. And this is coming from a guy that 2 years ago hit a wall in a big way. And
which we're going to talk about, by the way.
Yeah. So, I'll hold that
for
off
anybody like tuning into the burnout, travel burnout thing. I mean, that's an important conversation.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, spoiler alert. Sorry.
Yeah. All of those things, they factor into this bigger picture of enjoying this life that you're building.
All right. What's next? We got 2 more from the tips segment of this conversation.
I would say embrace all of the travel options. We talked about hostels and co-livings and
amen, brother.
and yeah, I mean, zero to travel, if you can still hop a train for free, get it. I remember one of the first episodes I listened to was somebody who was literally jumping on cargo trains and traveling across Europe.
Matt Derrick, I think. Oh, it was a long time ago. Train hopping. Yeah, that's a crazy way to travel. Something I think I'm past my prime for that.
Yeah, no. And when I say embrace all the options, I wouldn't hesitate to stay at a hostel anytime. I think there's a ton of great reasons to do that. And one of them being financial, and the other one being you're going to meet a lot of people from around the world that are trying to do what you're doing if you're traveling a little bit more like a tourist. So, really just embracing all the opportunities and saying yes, and getting over your stigmas, your misconceptions, things like that.
Ego sometimes.
Yeah, ego. And, that actually leads me to one of the other points that I was going to say is let others know what is important to you right now. And if you really want to embark on this life where travel has become one of, if not your main priority, that's going to be potentially a shift to the people around you, probably to your family. And there's going to be people that you're either going to ignore that conversation with them, or you're going to go ahead and have it and get it out of the way. And one of the things that I had to do early on was to look at the people in my life, the friends in my life, especially when I was trying to pay off that debt. I literally looked at my best friends and I said, this is monumentally important to me. I'm tired of living this way. This isn't working. So during these situations where you might want to pressure me into having that next beer, or pressure me into, going on this trip that I can't really afford right now at this point in my life, please don't. Please either align with me or leave it alone, or else I'm going to have to back away a little bit for the time being, because this is my priority. So if travel is that priority and this really means a lot to you, look at the people in your life and say, hey, do you want to be on this train with me? Whether it's just mental and emotionally, or heck, it could be physically. You might find a new travel partner that says, I've been thinking the same thing. I really want to travel more. So let's make this happen. And now all of a sudden it got cheaper. But really try and get the people in your life that influence in the background the way you may have made decisions in the past on board with how you're going to choose to make decisions now. And if you're really prioritizing travel, look at your family and say, hey, this is something that I'm doing. It's really important to me. It might look weird to you, but you can be curious. Don't be judgmental. Ask questions. Ask me about what I'm doing. Be, inquisitive, but don't try and hold me back from this at the moment. Be supportive. And to me, that was a huge part of once I embraced the experimentality and that idea of these things don't have to go perfectly. They don't even have to go right. They just need to give me data to grow on. Then I actually started using that with my family, with my friends. I had a friend come to me and say, are you okay? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, we've been talking. And I'm like, first of all, who's we? Oh, some of my friends, 3 or 4 of my friends got together and they're like, is Jason okay? He's selling all of his things. He's buying one-way tickets to different countries. He's changing his client base and all this stuff. And I had to look at her and say, I'm better than I've ever been. And this is all just small little experiments that I'm doing. It's very safe, but it looks crazy from the outside lens. So a lot of these people are only seeing what these little snippets of your life, and they're like, whoa, this looks really different, or they're really prioritizing something they've never done. So really just get those people aligned and know who is going to support you and who might hold you back in any of these things, whether it be the budget thing or the travel thing or the changing of jobs thing. Really get the naysayers and go ahead and sideline them as much as you can for a while, and find the ones that are going to support you and potentially even be along for the ride. And that location indie, that's part of the reason that I'm where I'm at now, is because I aligned myself with people that were thinking the same way, that didn't think this was a weird step in life, and that were supporting me whenever I was hitting some of those lows, because all of those other audiences, they can't support you in this thing because they don't understand what you're going through.
Just so people, that was a community I used to be a part of, unconventional folks, I guess, like us. I encourage anybody that's struggling to find those words to literally just rewind this and listen to how Jason framed that, or how you said it. You could literally take that as a script of what you said and say that to your friends, your family, your colleague, whoever you have to have that conversation with. It's so easy to not have those conversations, and not because we don't want to. I just think it's because life is busy, and it's just like, when are we going to sit down and get deep on something or whatever? But that, like, the way you laid it out and the way you actually said it, I think people can just, like, if they don't need to reinvent the wheel, they could just take that and say that to their friend, or just like play the clip, be like, here's how I feel. Just hit play and play Jason's, how he explained it, because I can't emphasize enough how strongly I feel about that last point and how powerful it is, to take the time to let people know, and then to get them either aligned or just to have an understanding of, if they're not aligned, okay, I'm not going to sit here, and I never want to preach anybody and tell somebody what to do, or like, you should cut that person out of your life if they're not aligned. But you said to that individual, or I'm going to have to take a step back. That might mean, maybe not doing things with them socially. It might mean more than that. But when you're working towards something, you have to seriously consider surrounding yourself with the right people, right? That are like cheering you on. You want the cheerleaders, and if they're not going to be cheerleaders, like, you can't help. I don't know how much, what experience you had with your family. I know some people, they just don't get the support from their family. You can't trade your family out for another family that's going to support you, but you can just be honest and let them know, like you explained, and then just, I guess, keep your distance, or just, I don't really know. That's going to be an individual journey for everybody, but
this is adulting 101.
You don't want to be around the naysayers, like, that are holding you back.
Yeah. This doesn't have to do with travel. It doesn't have to do with budgeting. This has to do with good adulting decisions, is to surround yourself with people that align with, the positive moves you're trying to make, and to distance yourself with the ones that might hold you back. But that does become harder and harder as we settle into our rhythms in life, and things get a little bit complacent. It is hard to make choices that go a bit against the flow. And, all of these changes are difficult, but the sooner you address them and get them out of the way and at least know where you're at. Again, back to that whole knowledge is power thing. If you're just guessing on who might align with you or who might not, then that's not helpful. And yeah, I never said cut anybody out of your life. There's actually a chapter in the book about this exact topic and about aligning with the right flow and distancing yourself from the other flow, but not cutting yourself off from that, merely taking a step back and saying, right now, this is my emphasis and this is what I need to do. And it doesn't even need to be out loud with some of those people that you feel might hold you back. It can just be a step back and say, I'm going to spend a little bit more time over here than I am over here for this, while this change is happening, and, no worries. But you might have to do that on a couple of different fronts. And my family was supportive to a degree, but they were also really confused. And I just kind of had to look at them and say, I understand you're confused. This isn't something you've ever wanted. This isn't something you understand. You haven't been doing the research that I've been doing. You haven't been doing the work in the background, the hours and hours of learning and understanding and trying to line up the things to make these life changes. So to them, it did look drastic. They just had to trust me that I was going to take care of myself. But I did have to have some of those conversations with my mom and my dad and my family and nephews. And, once I did that, they were kind of like, oh, okay, cool. This is interesting. Now I actually want to ask some more questions and maybe align with you. And even 10 years later, some of them I don't think really understand what my life looks like. They never will, but they're okay with it. They think it's cool.
Yeah. I mean, that people get used to, people always say about that, about kids, like kids will adapt, and like, the family, all the people around you, like they will adapt to the new normal eventually, even though it doesn't feel like it in the beginning. Or if they don't, then whatever. That's one thing I wanted to bring up. Like, I think that all the time, most of the time, if not all the time, anybody that's naysaying or trying to hold you back, you think of the avatars, like the drinking buddies who would be like, what are you doing? This is stupid. Yeah, whatever. Whatever it is, it's their issue, not yours, right? It's almost always their issue. Maybe there's jealousy, maybe there's fear that, hey, this person's actually going to take off and do something, and what am I doing here with my life? Like there's a lot of this stuff, and that's not being judgy. It's just like a fact. I think oftentimes when people are taking that attitude of really being naysayers and trying to hold you back, it's their issue, not yours. And I just think that's important for people to remember as you go into those conversations, because it almost, to me, acts like, if you can remember that going in, you're like putting a protective barrier around yourself, just like of compassion, right? Okay. Like they have a problem with this. That's like something they have to deal with. I'm not on their life journey. I'm on my own life journey.
Well, that's very enlightened of us to talk about. That's a huge part of this lifestyle is mindfulness, because it is so different than what, you and I, well, you traveled more than I did, but really what the mainstream person grew up with, this is very different, and that can lead to burnout. So part of this mindfulness of, you said, oh, that could be viewed as judgmental. No, that's the reality. And if you're able to look at somebody else and say, okay, this is probably coming from their fear, their insecurities, their misconceptions, then you're also aware of your own fears, your own insecurities, and your own misconceptions. So that's being a compassionate human being in general, is being able to see that I have these things, I have, these ways that I might look at other people and interpret them, and they're probably having these same ways. And once we keep an eye on those things, we're a better human being. So that I see no problem with that.
Yeah. Okay. The point you made a few minutes ago too, I'll quote you exactly. This has nothing to do with travel. That's okay. Between you and me and everybody listening, that's like the secret to this whole show. It's a travel show, but a lot of these things that you need to do to travel, you're achieving a dream. And really it has nothing to do with travel in many ways. It has to do with confronting big life choices and confronting every aspect of your life in some cases, or different aspects, I should say, very important aspects, relationships, like you're talking about, having those conversations with people, financial aspect, all of these things, the adulting 101 stuff that we all know and love. Choosing travel, I think, forces a lot of those big questions. And that is where a ton of this value is, even before you go on the trip. you learn so much even before you go on the trip.
That's and it's funny that you say that about your podcast, because that's what I say about my book. And actually somebody reviewed the book on Amazon, and that's what they said. They said this is more a book about life and self-improvement. It just happens to be wrapped in travel. And that's exactly the case. The book is written from the standpoint of the mental, emotional, financial, social, and whatever else that you need to overcome to travel more. But if you just take out that travel more, these are just life things that we have to deal with on the regular. And the more time we spend on them, the more, for lack of a black and white way of putting it, the more successful we're going to be in, having options, making choices, dealing with these things in a compassionate, way that's not only compassionate for ourselves, but also for those around us,
Yeah. Love it. Okay. You sent me a little bit of a timeline as I was preparing for this conversation, and I wanted to jump ahead in the timeline, but back in the past to 2023. You had been diagnosed with diabetes. You had been traveling around doing some co-living, just to give people some context, been to some nomadic events, different things like that. And then you highlighted this time where it was like, you said burnout, and then you were like breakdown, ? Breakthrough. And I just thought this was interesting because burnout, breakdown, breakthrough, man, there's a fine line between those three. And if you think about that, burnout and breakthrough, you would think of one's positive, one's negative. But I find in my experience, man, there is a very fine line between these three things. How did you know it was time to perhaps do things a little differently? Because this also can become a question for a lot of people during a journey, whether it's a business journey, like an actual physical travel journey, whatever. It's not like you're going to wake up every day and like everything's going to be 1,000% like rainbows and unicorns. There are going to be like what Seth Godin calls the dip, like these low parts where you kind of go through. And then sometimes it can be a little tricky to identify whether that's just like, oh, I'm burned out, or this is just like, hey, I'm just going through a little thing, and then, things are going to level out. How did you know you were burnt out? And how did you know when the burnout was over? And what kind of advice can you share around that? And is it even healthy to label like a period of your life burnout? That's another question I never even really thought of.
Well, that's why in my notes to you, there was no clarification. It was burnout, breakthrough. It is.
Yeah. What was this?
Yeah. Well, and I am fairly clear on what it was for me, but I think the important thing is awareness, and back to that mindfulness. And really, whenever I was 28, it was a financial burnout. It was stress and anxiety, financial burnout. And it hit me hard. And I said, I can't live like this anymore. That was a very defining moment where I said, this is no longer about me wondering. This is very clear that I can't do this. This is a moment that I need to pay attention to. And I think that's the difference is, we have a lot of little mini moments and many epiphanies that we might listen to, we might see, and eventually something screams at us and says, you're not listening. You need to pay attention. This is big. And that's where I was at. I was, I sold my home in 2019 and started living, fairly nomadically. Of course, in 2020, COVID hit. I was in Mexico for a couple of months at the time. And then 8 months later, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes while back in the US during COVID. So within 16 months of, really within 5 years of starting to travel at all internationally, and then selling my stuff, and then getting diagnosed with this very life-changing 24/7, all over the place thing that I have to deal with on a daily basis, there was a lot of change happening there. Fast forward, I got back out traveling a year later, went to Portugal as my first trip after COVID and after being diagnosed, and literally froze 2 of my insulin pens on the plane over to my first international trip since being diagnosed. So there were plenty
scary.
There were plenty of
scary moments. Gosh.
Yeah. But I mean, my backup plans have backup plans these days.
You're like, I literally need this to live. This better stay frozen.
Yeah. But, fast forward again to 2023, and I was in Bansko, Bulgaria. There's a big digital nomad conference in Bansko every year. 1,000 people that live this type of a lifestyle go there in the summer, and there's a lot of speakers for a week, all that fun stuff. And I was riding this high of getting all this information about how I could, change my YouTube channel, or this next way that I could do my side hustle, or these other businesses, or how could I get out of my mainstream job and just have my own thing. So I was coming off this conference high, and I was standing there in my $500 a month, 2-bedroom, fully furnished apartment in Bansko. That's just a plug for cheap apartments in Bansko. It's a very cost-effective place to go for a while. I was standing there, and everything should have been great, but I was contemplating creating this website that you mentioned earlier, type1diabetestravel.com, because I really wanted to give some resources for people that were traveling with major medical conditions like type 1, to say, here's a place that you can go to find a lot of these answers, because this even levels up the scariness of, long form travel whenever you have to deal with a major medical condition. So I was thinking to myself, I've created websites. I've done a good job. I understand keyword and keyword research and SEO and all of these things. I'm just going to spend the next 6 months and buckle down, and I'll spend about 200 hours on this website while I'm also balancing my life and my money making and all these things. And I was scrolling Instagram, and I flipped on this thing, and it was this cheesy looking meme picture. And it said, if you keep doing the same things you've always done, why would you expect anything different? I lost it. I started crying. I broke down by myself there going, okay, why would you spend 200 hours on this next thing when that could just be another, form of buckling down and not actually enjoying this life that you're building? What's the real reason for this? And essentially, it made me step back and say, are you enjoying this life that you're building, or have you just traded one grind for another grind? And that's kind of what I had done. Was I had pulled back on the way that I was making money professionally compared to in my 20s and 30s. And I was spending all of that extra time trying to build all these little things off to the side. And that wasn't necessary. I had a good thing going. I could enjoy my life. I could back off. And that's when I started to say, okay, what are you missing? Why are you putting your time into these certain areas, and should it be put somewhere else? And I started to play more. I started to rest more. I started to, sit by a river in Bansko every couple of days for hours at a time and do nothing. These things that...
Insert the crowd noise here. Everybody's cheering for you. He's relaxing. He's enjoying his travels.
But it was really difficult. It was a really difficult thing to do, to actually say...
You had to release and let go of all that, and then just be.
Yeah. And since then, in the past 2 years, I've really had to practice sitting in silence more, realizing that productivity doesn't always have to be clad in traditional productivity, that sometimes doing nothing is being more productive than doing something. And, for somebody who is a recovering perfectionist and productivity type of a person, that's a really hard thing. And it's a muscle that you actually have to practice. And so that's where you ask me, when did I know that the burnout was over? There wasn't really a moment that the burnout was over. I think there was a rebalancing of the way that I was approaching my life. And there was just this moment of, things had gotten a little bit wonky over and over and over again. And finally I had to address it. And that was that epiphany moment of saying, okay, whether I call it burnout or an epiphany, or just I'm ready to make another change, I stood back and I said, okay, what's this going to look like for a few months? And then I'll make another decision. So I chose to back off of my personal projects and the Nomad Experiment and YouTube and all those things. I chose to back off of them for 6 months and just do the things that I needed to do to make my life work. So work my job that pays my bills, and the rest of the time find ways to really enjoy these things. And I told myself, give it 3 to 6 months and then see how you feel, readdress it, and choose what is next after that point. And then 18 months later, after 6 months, I was like, this feels good. This feels like the right balance for me right now. And I feel expansive in trying some of these things that I haven't tried since I was younger, playing and painting and relaxing and all these things that I was really putting some effort into. And eventually I woke up 4 months ago and I said, you know what, I really want to engage myself in some of these personal projects that I'm fired up about again. And that's when the website that actually caused me to have that breakdown burnout moment is the one that I decided to start creating 3 or 4 months ago. And now that's live, and it was good. It was comfortable. I learned to balance and not to overcommit myself to work and all those things because of that time of mindfulness. And now it's just a practice. We got to keep practicing this thing.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm so glad that website's live for anybody listening that is battling diabetes, still wants to live that travel lifestyle. I mean, he's the expert and he's been out there doing this. He has type 1 and he's rocking and rolling and still out seeing the world. So I love the mission and the intention and the fact that you're just willing to share your experiences with it, which I'm going to ask you about in a second. I just did want to highlight, that idea of chunking down during the burnout. Like you said, I'm just going to try this for 3 months. Again, going back to like the heart of where your work started, the experimental kind of mindset of just like, hey, let me just live this way over the next few months. It doesn't have to be, to me, that's like, I agree with you. Like that's a much easier approach than to like look at the whole big picture, just becomes too overwhelming. But if you look at making some changes over the next couple months or for a particular season or whatever, it does become much more manageable in many ways. And I don't want to say in all ways, but yeah, you can get your head around what that means, for example, financially over 3 months as opposed to over like 18 months. It turned out to be 18 months, but the way you chunked it down is really nice. I wanted to ask you about the experience of getting diagnosed and then traveling and figuring all that out. And I know this is not going to apply to everybody traveling with like a major medical condition, which is why I'm just wondering if you could pull out sort of the biggest, I guess, maybe perhaps most useful thing you learned from that experience that might apply to other people, whether it's medical or perhaps there's another thing they're dealing with that isn't medical, but it's something that perhaps is keeping them maybe feeling more tied to a place or not able to kind of make that transition to the next version of their lifestyle. Again, I know that's tricky because, yours is specifically a medical condition, or maybe you could just share both, because there might be other people out there listening with a condition like this.
The reality of it is that, and I've been researching the numbers, something like 10 to 20% of US citizens are going to have an autoimmune disease in their lifetime.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Add that to the 30% cancer rate. And sorry to bring things down, but either the person listening to this is going to likely deal with one of those things or someone very close to them is going to. So
true, yeah.
Whether you're traveling with a major medical condition or whether you're traveling with someone with a major medical condition, that's a major stressor and it's an emotional thing. So the awareness isn't just if you have this issue, it's the people around you do. If you're lucky enough not to be dealing with something like this, there are people around you that do. So, the diagnosis and things like that, just to quickly touch on the actual diagnosis, I was 42, whenever I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And a lot of people recall type 1 diabetes being called juvenile diabetes back in the 90s and 2000s. We don't call it that anymore because more than 50% of people are diagnosed over the age of 18. So it's no longer a juvenile, concern. It's people of all ages are being diagnosed. And essentially, I had just learned how to figure out world travel and figure out what my backup plans look like if something went wrong, if I lost my passport or something like that. And now it was a matter of saying, okay, there's this new thing. And what does that look like? And oh, by the way, there's people around the world living with these same things in different countries, in the same places. It looks a little bit different, but they're dealing with the same things. And most of the places that a lot of people that are at the beginning of their travel journeys, a lot of the places they're going are the countries where my insulin is made, or that, the devices on my body that help keep me, managing it well, they're actually made in these countries. And that was something I had to really pay attention to was, if we haven't traveled a lot, we have this tunnel vision of we only know how it works here. And we tend to forget that it has to work elsewhere for other people, because a lot of the afflictions that we're dealing with are worldwide. It just looks different. So that was a huge eye opener for me to say, okay, wonder where my insulin's made. Oh, it's made in Germany. Well, I guess if I'm traveling in Germany, I at least know that, that I can get that there. And that started to open my eyes. So, whether you have Crohn's or you have, any of these other things that you're dealing with on literally a daily basis, there's somebody in that place that's dealing with it the same way. And there's a medical system that you can at least find out the backup plans. And that was a huge unlock moment for me, just to say, okay, this is doable. I just got to figure that out. And then it was a matter of, like I said it a couple times, having backup plans for my backup plans, and knowing how to manage, not in my most optimal ways, the way that I always do, but what happens if that breaks down, and what happens if that breaks down, and realizing that if I need to get back to the US, then I'm willing to spend the money to do that, or to have evacuation insurance, or upgrade my travel medical insurance, and make sure that these things are in place, because it sure as hell ain't going to stop me from living the life that I want to live. It's just going to look a lot different.
That's amazing, man. Wow. Yeah, and I guess when you have all those backup plans in place, you execute that to get to the point where you feel comfortable, and if this
no, absolutely not. Actually, let me rebut that. These backup plans are in place just enough so that I know I can do the thing. They're not. I don't want anybody. I think that can hold people back if they think that they have to know every single detail of what if something doesn't go perfectly. I'm not even going to say what if it goes right or if it goes wrong. What if it doesn't go perfectly? And then all of a sudden somebody listening to this says, that just sounds exhausting. I'm just going to stay home. No, you don't need to know exactly what your backup plans for your backup plans. You just need to know that they exist, that you have those opportunities. And that goes to another thing in the book. Actually, one of the sixth thing on my list that we didn't go over was
a bonus one. Nice.
The bonus. Yeah. Is make a list of what's the worst that could happen and what's the best that can happen. 2 columns. And for anything in life, really, but travel, this is what we're talking about here. What's the worst that can happen and what's the best that can happen? And then start crossing those things off the worst list that are so unlikely to happen that it's just, I'm going to get murdered. Okay. The cartel is going to take me away. Okay. So unlikely to happen, or figure out what you need to do to cross that off your list and get rid of that misconception. And then look at the lists again, and you're going to see that the things on the best that can happen lists, like I'm going to meet new people, I'm going to experience a new country, I'm going to experience a new culture, I'm going to do all these expansive things, those become so big, and the potential fear things that are going to hold you back become so secondary that you're like, okay, those scare me, but what would I do if those things did start to happen or creep? If my type 1, if my insulin pump broke the day I got to a new country, okay, that's a real possibility. Am I going to get a new insulin pump? Not necessarily. I need to know how to manage with, multiple daily injections again. Okay, I can handle that. I can cross that off my list because it no longer scares me. I know that I can manage that. So it's not about knowing exactly what you're going to do. It's about knowing that it's doable and that you can manage it.
I'm just really inspired by you and the fact that, all of this happened in such a short period of time, and that yet you still continued to pursue the lifestyle you wanted. And it's just a testament to your character, man. So honored to call you a friend, honored to have you here as a guest. Before I let you go, we got to get some destination recommendations, man. I never like to ask for favorites because that's a cheat, lazy question. So I'm not going to do it. But I think the ultimate compliment, and I've said this on the show before, for a destination is for a traveler who's been somewhere to say that they would love to go back. So can you give us 3 destinations that you're dying to go back to?
Well, I will preface this with that I travel really slow. So I see about 3 destinations, maybe 4 a year.
That's okay, man. Tell us the ones you love to spend a lot of time in then.
Yeah. I'm heading back to San Cristobal, Mexico right now. I spend a good amount of time in Mexico. I really enjoy, whenever I go to Mexico, I tend to stay in smaller places, Pueblo Magicos, they call them. They're cities that are probably under 200,000 people, and there's no metro systems. You're taking collectivos and things like that, but I really love places where I can go and just walk around and be slow and enjoy and soak up. So San Cristobal, Mexico is one of my favorite places. I've also been, spent a lot of time in Oaxaca, Guanajuato, Querétaro, but any of those places. Mexico was one of those places that scared me to death because of the bubble of media, politics, and things like that I was in growing up. And I got over that because I challenged myself to go visit and find out for myself. And now it's one of the places that I love to go back to because of the people and because of the culture in those slower places. I did enjoy Bansko, Bulgaria. It's this unique little town in the middle of the mountains. It was supposed to be the next Vale of outside of the Swiss Alps. We think of Vale, but over in Europe, they think of the Swiss Alps, and it was supposed to be kind of the next destination. And then the bubble burst back in 2008, 2009. So they have all these buildings that were supposed to be hotels, making this a huge skiing, snowboarding destination that never really came to fruition. So now they have a lot of very nice, empty rooms, and they're renting them out to people for a very good cost. So this is a really small town, maybe 10,000 people, tons of digital nomads there. So you're going to have a lot of English speakers, people that are living this lifestyle. And honestly, the food is really good. It's, Balkans style, Eastern Europe. I don't know. I'm probably butchering the exact stuff because geography is still not my thing. But Bansko is a place that I like. There's a river running through it, and you can go up into the mountains and mountain bike just straight from town. And yeah, it's a really unique place that I like to go slow in. So I will be back there.
That. I know you can skiing there
yeah.
a couple of years ago. Definitely, yeah, good affordable skiing and
hot
cool
springs.
Place to check out. Yeah, yes, hot springs. Yeah, love a hot spring. Love a good hot spring.
And then I guess if I were to name a third, I would say Portugal. I spent 3 months that first trip out of COVID in Portugal, and spent about a month and a half in Lisbon. Had a really great co-working space in Lisbon because work ramped up and I had to kind of stay in one place, and chose to get a co-working space. This co-working space had over 1,000 plants. That was their claim to fame, and room for 150 coworkers. But
what was the name of it? Do you remember?
I can't remember right now. But honestly, if you Google co-working Lisbon and plants, it'll probably pop up. But Portugal is a place that I really enjoy. It's got
second home, Lisboa.
Second home,
Lisboa. Second home, Lisbon. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Lisbon and Porto, I like Porto. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit slower, but there's a good vibe in Portugal, especially if you want to slow down, get outside of those places. But then inside Lisbon, inside Porto, the public transit's really good. It doesn't feel overwhelmingly large, especially since a lot of these places, if for somebody that hasn't traveled a lot, and a lot of these travel destinations, especially in Europe or Mexico, they have what is considered the old town or the centro in Mexico, which is the touristed area. It's where most people are going to stay in or around. And that is in reality where you're going to spend a lot of your time. And a lot of time that's not in the major downtown area where all the big buildings are or where business is happening. So even if you go to a place that has, 500,000, 1 million people, it's unlikely. You can likely find the area of town where you don't feel like you're in a major metropolitan. And that's how it felt in Porto and also Lisbon. You're enough outside of the main that you don't feel like you're completely inundated with all these massive millions of people. So yeah, Portugal, I think is a good vibe. And also it's a good price point for people coming from the US because it's probably the cheapest country in Western Europe that you can go to. And it's close, but it is compared to Spain and France, which is the most touristed destination, I think, in the world. France is. It's a bit cheaper than those Western European countries, so a little bit easier to manage.
If you're loving the vibe today, I am, and you want to get the full Monty, we'll link up to the Beginner Traveler's Guide, of course. All the other websites, type 1 diabetes travel.com. You got the nomadexperiment.com, and of course the book. Am I missing anything, Jay? I don't know if I still have a chapter in the book. I had a chapter in the book at some point. which was an honor. I still have a chapter in the book, but this book's great. I mean, for example, I just flipped open my copy. It's like, stop treating travel like a vacation. You got me hooked.
It's very important for long term.
I love that for long term. Yeah. Yeah. Jay, am I missing anything? Do you want to share anything else here before we? Yeah.
No, that's it. If you want to find all the things, you can either go to the nomadexperiment.com, and in the menu, there's a link tree, and in both of the websites. So type1diabetestravel.com, there's a link tree in the menu, and that'll get you to a lot of the high level stuff and get you to the book and some other resources, whether you are looking to break into travel or whether you are traveling with a major medical condition.
Do you want to leave us with like a favorite quote or just a little food for thought before we let you go?
You just get started, stop listening to all these podcasts and get going.
Well, I mean, you can keep this one in your feed for a little while longer.
Pause the podcast, get going, and then resume the podcast on the plane.
Love it. J-Rob, thanks, man. Always a pleasure. We'll chat soon.
Likewise. Good to see you, brother.
Cheers. There you have it. Thank you to J-Rob for stopping by the show. We got all the links in the show notes. And before I let you go, I did say I was going to leave you with a quote to wrap this one up. But first, got to give a shout out to Alex over in Saskatchewan, Canada. Over in, up in, around in, depending on where you are. He wrote me an email, said, "Hey, Jason, been a loyal listener for over 4 years now. Have been meaning to drop you a note to let you know how much I enjoy your pod. Recently got back from an epic trip to Nepal to trek to Everest Base Camp, and your special series on the Manaslu circuit was a source of inspiration leading up to my journey." Wait a minute, I'm just going to pop in here. Side note, I do have a small series I put together with my wife years ago called Trekking Nepal, your adventure guide, which you can find wherever you get podcasts. I'm not trying to plug that, but I'm going to mention it so you know what he's referring to. If that sounds fun, you can hear an audio adventure of our journey to Nepal some years ago. Okay, anyway, he goes on to say, "I love the variety of guests and interesting personal stories you share. Especially enjoyed the episode this summer with Connor Knighton, who visited every national park in a year. Podcast is a go-to listen, whether I'm on a flight, walking my dog, or dreaming about my next adventure. I'm now planning to take a work sabbatical for 7 months to solo travel, and your guests are a source of inspiration for embarking on long-term travel. Keep it up. Thanks for what you do. Best wishes, Alex." Thank you, Alex. I wanted to just share your email to just publicly, quote unquote, here on the podcast, say thanks for taking the time to get in touch and share your story, for being a listener of this show for 4 years. Wow. That still blows my mind that people have been listening for so long out there. I love that. And am honored. And also just this 7 months solo travel sabbatical. I mean, a sabbatical has a lot of the principles that were discussed today kind of built into it, right? It's a very experimental kind of way to go about things, right? A sabbatical, you're kind of hitting pause on a career, maybe on your studies, whatever it is. And it just goes back to that experimental mindset. I mean, I think we can experiment with these different lifestyles, travel-based or otherwise, and kind of see what comes out of them, see what direction it takes us, see where it takes us, literally, physically, if you're traveling, but also where it can take you in life. And I really see a lot of upside to just creating a framework that allows you a bit of an experimental time period where you can really go for something and just kind of be open-minded, but still have that structure. I think that can be really helpful for a lot of people. So anyway, I just wanted to share that shout out to kind of tie it in with the episode. And before I let you go, I am going to leave you with this quote from Shunryu Suzuki, one of my favorites. He said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few." And when we really embrace that beginner's mind, I think we really open ourselves up to learning, and we kind of lose the ego, right? We're not saying, "Oh, we know this all, we know this already." We just kind of drop all that and really open up to lessons that can be learned, kind of opens up our curiosity. And so I think that's a good way to end this one. So anyway, thank you for listening. Don't forget, you can keep in touch over at zerototravel.com/newsletter coming out of this one. If you have not signed up for that yet, keep in touch with the community over there. And I appreciate you being a part of this listening community. This is a community-powered show. That's what this is all about. It's about creating some helpful stuff for you. So if you have any feedback, advice, guests you want me to have on, you want to just pop in and say hello, you can always get in touch via email and sign up for the newsletter over there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.